In Ukraine, preparations have begun for a total intensification of mobilization. Many categories of Ukrainians who currently have a deferment or exemption will be deprived of it. Most likely, this is due to a shortage of personnel in the military. And basically, as we've already discussed 150 times with each passing day, the longer the war goes on, the more likely it is that new categories of Ukrainian citizens will be involved in the war. If right now, as of today, this still concerns men, then in the near future, let's be realistic, it could also be women. This could also mean lowering the mobilization age, and there's nothing that can be done about it, because that's how it happens. Yes, it happens when the war goes on, when new resources need to be brought in, and at the same time, unfortunately, corruption is flourishing in the country, chaos is flourishing, and instead of solving problems, they just try to hide them. Unfortunately, today we will go over some very interesting and important facts about this. So watch the video until the end to understand what and when will actually happen. First of all, the military ombudswoman Olha Reshetilova gave an interview to the publication Glavkom, and she stated that the current MLC system only conducts a superficial health check. If there are no obvious signs of illness, the person is considered fit for service. Reshetilova also mentioned that there is a problem of a bouquet of illnesses when a serviceman has a combination of several diseases that make him unfit for service. And at the same time, she adds that there will be certain changes on this issue in the future. I know that the Department of Health of the Ministry of Defense was preparing to remove certain diseases from the list of those that determine fitness for service. That is, more and more people who currently have diseases and are not subject to mobilization will increasingly become those who are fit for mobilization, regardless of the diseases they have now. So in fact, they are lowering, let's say, the threshold for illness, and will be involving more and more Ukrainians. That's the first fact. The second fact. In the Verkhovna Rada, they are discussing the possibility of removing the exemption from mobilization for men of conscription age who are studying in professional pre-higher education programs. That's how I report the most. Who is this about? This was reported by the head of the Verkhovna Rada Committee on Education, Serhiy Babak. We see that both our Ministry of Education and the educational committees in the Verkhovna Rada are not actually dealing with education itself. Unfortunately, education in Ukraine is declining rapidly. They are focused on finding as many people as possible to send to the army. That's what the Ministry of Education is actually doing right now. According to him, it is at this level of education that in 2024-2025, a large number of men over the age of 25 have started enrolling, after the deferment was restricted for studying in bachelor's and postgraduate programs. According to the provided data, the number of such applicants was 55,581 and 24,819, respectively. Babak notes that the Committee on Education, together with the Committee on National Security, Defense and Development, is working to limit the possibilities of evading military duty through educational mechanisms. You know, the main thing is that Babak, who is also of conscription age, can use political mechanisms to evade mobilization. And no one is going to limit him in this regard, so that specifically Babak and others like him do not use these mechanisms. This only shows one thing, that those who are looking for ways to avoid going to the front, including through education, if it is completely legal, everything will be changed for them, so that they do end up at the front, so that they are not safe, so that they are not protected. All these loopholes will be closed. If we talk about our politicians, both local and parliamentary, they will have their exemption and their protection from mobilization to the front forever until the end of martial law, that is, until the end of the war. So, as we can see in today's reality, no one is actually planning to hold elections. So that's the situation. We see that any options for deferments, postponements for mobilization, for which Ukrainians don't have to pay $10,000, $20,000 to some fixers, any such options will be closed. because the money goes past the register. You know, otherwise the military enlistment officers would take this poor student who will no longer be a student. They'd say, give us 10 grand or you'll go to the front. He gives them 10 grand and goes on his way. So in this case, the student kind of has a deferment, like he's of draft age, but the military enlistment office can't really catch him, as they say. So we can see where this real struggle is happening. Unfortunately, next. Kukarchuk, the deputy commander of the 3rd Army Corps, responded to the incident with the Ukrainian soldiers at the border who were not prepared for the Russian attack and called for reforms in the military. What happened in Sumy region, for those who don't know? There, Russian soldiers entered Ukrainian territory and took away more than 50 civilians who lived there and had previously refused to evacuate. And then, photos were also published on social media, as I understand from drones, where it was clearly visible what, unfortunately, the Ukrainian territorial defense soldiers were doing. They were setting up picnics there, showing the finger to those drones, and that's it, basically not doing anything. And this, in fact, allowed the Russian army to break through the border. They didn't have to break in, they just walked in. Is that it? And now it's like another point on the front has opened again because the border was breached, and now they're fortifying their positions there. It's just that today this started happening. What does Kukarchuk say? The mentioned servicemen did not go abroad, are not hiding from the Territorial Recruitment Center, did not run away to the Special Investigations Department, but came voluntarily to fulfill their military duty. But from a system that does not aim to win, you cannot expect the highest level of dedication from every single soldier. He also said that the level of a unit is determined by the level of the worst soldier in the unit, not the other way around. The army needs immediate reforms, especially in the context of shaping meaning. Ukrainians need to understand what they are fighting for, and only then will such situations change. So we see that Kukarchuk basically, as always, talks about those uncomfortable problems that other representatives of the armed forces of Ukraine try to keep quiet about, hide, and so on. Let's take, for example, the situation with the SZZ. The prosecutor's office closed access to the registries, and now it's unclear what the SZZ level is. Immediately, in the Ukrainian information space, people are saying that the SZZ level started to drop. Why did this happen right after the registries were closed? In fact, if the registries were really closed, then it's logical to conclude that the situation there is actually only getting worse. And that's how it goes next. Next, we had an interview with the head of communications of the Western District. Next is the operational command. Yes, TCK and TSP are not demons. They are not some organizations working against Ukraine's interests. Yes, they work in their own interests. And in the interest of those who give them orders to catch people on the streets and illegally throw them into vans, and then, so that people offer them money which they will take to let these people go back. This is probably in the interest of the state. He actually gave an interview to Hromadske, and what did he say? There were a few very interesting points here. First of all, the local authorities must provide proper conditions in the temporary accommodation points for conscripts, rooms, beds, and living arrangements. Actually, these very points, yes, temporary accommodation points, so-called distribution points, we saw them in Kyiv as an example. So, what is the situation there? And this only shows one thing, that the local authorities have long needed elections. Because what is happening locally is not just excesses at the local level, it's simply a lack of responsibility and a feeling of total impunity. Because they understand that as long as the war continues, they will remain in their positions. That's why nothing will be done to them for this. Next is demonizing the TCC and SP a mistake. They are involved in mobilization and social support, working with veterans, military families, the missing and prisoners of war. They also detain people on the street, put them in vans, hold them illegally in TCC buildings, and commit crimes for which they should be held accountable. They and their leaders should all be in prison, but for some reason this isn't happening. That's why I think the demonization isn't happening intentionally, but rather it's simply a statement and confirmation of actions that aren't actually punished. In words, yes, but not in practice. And that's exactly why this demonization is happening. Because if the military enlistment office workers were punished for their criminal offenses, then most likely the abuse as a systemic phenomenon wouldn't exist. Next, changes are needed. Strengthening citizens' responsibility for violating mobilization laws, legislative support for mobile notification groups, and a clearer and more responsible role for law enforcement. Actually, law enforcement already has quite clear powers, which they violate just the same. When they turn a blind eye to the fact that military enlistment office workers use force against civilians, which they are not allowed to do, it's prohibited by the Constitution, or when police officers illegally bring those they've caught themselves to the military enlistment office building. Let me remind you that, in principle, no one has the right to bring anyone to the military enlistment office building. By law, neither the police nor the military enlistment office workers have the right to bring people to the enlistment office buildings, and even more so, they have no right to detain them there. Taking away phones and all other belongings, which unfortunately we see every day. Furthermore, since May, there has been public and transparent oversight, with data on criminal and disciplinary cases against enlistment office and social protection officials being published every month. You know, no one has been punished yet for the bussification. They kept saying that I was suspended. These reports were published for a while, then stopped because everyone knew they were fiction. There are no criminal cases that have led to a court verdict where someone actually went to prison. I specifically know of only one case, and that's with that unstable TCK officer in Kharkiv who was caught on camera beating a teacher. And even then he was punished only because of the total informational support and public interest in this issue. And how many cases are there that remain completely without video, without cameras, without publications, that are simply kept quiet? And what happens, happens, and people can't protect themselves in any way. Next, civil society is also responsible. Attacks and crimes against the territorial recruitment centers are crimes against the army. Yes, well, that's true, just like the use of force by the territorial recruitment center officers against civilians. This violates Ukraine's constitution, abuses authority, and includes other criminal offenses. And that's why, on both sides, there should be systematic punishment according to the current legislation. Is this being done? We know that nothing is being done there at all. Then the TCK and SP became hostages of the situation. They turned from service centers into structures that perform all typical and atypical functions. So at the very least, they could stop catching people on the street and return to the limits of their authority and not mess around with nonsense, but of course that won't happen. Tombrovskoho, by the way, lately they've started to actively promote him. They probably want to give him a promotion, move him to some central role. Yeah, maybe transfer him from Lviv to Kiev, I don't know. Mobilization should be discussed openly by everyone involved, without fear of political consequences. The state's survival is at stake. Yes, it should be like that, but it has to happen now. While it's not happening, it shouldn't be at the expense of civilian lives. We end up in an absurd situation where servicemen are catching civilians on the street and sending them to the front to fight while they themselves stay in the rear. Because this story is, well, a bit strange. It smells a bit off, I would even say. So, at the same time as the Mindich Gate and the embezzlement of 100 million euros, they're telling us about the survival of the state. Something doesn't add up here, right? I think so too. The medical examination commissions work according to the International Classification of Diseases. There's a clear table of illnesses and explanations for each article. Issues may result from errors or dishonesty by individual doctors, but establishing medical examination commissions is the Ministry of Health and local communities' responsibility. Actually, we already talked about this at the beginning of this video, that the Ministry of Health is not much different from the territorial recruitment centers. And basically, just like the Ministry of Education, they don't do anything good for the civilian population. That's it. They are simply, as parts of one big mechanism, doing everything to find as many Ukrainian men as possible and force them into the army. And the 80 people who then run away directly from the training centers and go absent without leave, absolutely no one cares about them. It's better to just close the registries and keep ignoring this problem. He says that there are fewer mass abuses now than in 2022 and 2023. The system has changed, although isolated absurd cases still happen. We know that the problem with the VLK is a problem that, on the contrary, is only growing now, just like the problem with the SZCH. The situation is now much worse than in 2022 and 2023, as even the military frequently discuss it publicly and we don't understand it. We have discussed on the channel more than once that the longer the war goes on, the more people with serious illnesses end up on the front line. And now, military units are no longer competing for who will get more soldiers, but rather for who will get fewer sick people who, in principle, won't be able to join in carrying out any tasks at all. So that's the story. We ended up with quite a lengthy video, and I think it turned out to be very interesting. What do you think, friends? Write in the comments. It will be very interesting to hear and read your opinions. I wish you all a great day. See you next time.